Hello, my name is Connor Kester. I am the Director of Family Outreach here at Victory Lutheran Church. Thank you so much for checking out our channel today. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss a video. Now on to our sermon.
So for this series, we're looking at popular doubts about the resurrection of Jesus. And today we're going to talk about as we look at evidence and the improbable evidence of the empty tomb. What does that mean? And looking at there's a lot of things that we could probably think of that happened, but did they or did they not really happen? I remember several years ago when we moved into our latest house. It should be, I'm hoping it's our last house. It's a two-story. If you've ever been to our home, we have a two-story house that has on the very top, there's a deck running the length of it. And because our kitchen is at the top and then it's built into the side of a hill, and our backyard is down at the bottom. And when we had just moved in, there's boxes everywhere. You maybe have furniture, you don't have furniture, you're doing all of that. And then we had our dog. And some of you know my dog, Hannah. And Hannah's they call her a Baja mix. She was just a rescue from Mexico, so that means at least half of her is pit bull. And the other half is who knows what, but we think lab. And about a 40-pound dog and about yay big. And so we're like, what do we do with her? We can't take her out when we're running errands. We don't want to leave her into the backyard because we don't know if it's secure or not. And so we left her out on the deck, and the deck railing was it's about this tall. It's about as tall as the altar. And we thought, good, she'll be fine. And she can lie out in the sun, she can do this and that, no problem. So we go off for the rest of the day and do the errands, and then we come back, and where's Hannah? Yeah, she's downstairs. She's in the backyard running around. And like nothing was out of the ordinary. She's a happy dog, there's no limping or anything. She's just doing her thing. We tried to figure out how did this happen? Did you leave a door open? What happened? Did she slide in? What's going on here? And we thought about through all the things. And then for the longest time, we just refused to believe that she jumped. We would have been easier for us to believe that somehow she had just heard somebody talking about Star Trek this morning, that somehow she just got beamed from one place to another. That made more sense to us than her jumping. But over time, to solve the mystery, when you just look at the evidence, things like her breed, she's a jumper. We have videotape. We actually have a digital recording of her jumping over our 5-foot fence, over the gate and getting out in the neighborhood. She's not a terror. She just would jump the fence, so she liked to do that. So there's different evidence, and finally, we just came to the conclusion she jumped over and survived. And that was the final evidence. We just had to look at it, and we had to, as improbable as it was, we had to come to that conclusion. But the neat thing is, though, is that after we finally came to that conclusion, now Amron's a lot faster to believe that stuff than I am. So when I finally came to that conclusion, I was able to look at my dog and go, wow, that's an amazing dog. That's an amazing dog, and she's a wonderful dog. It's an amazing dog. Because now when you finally come to believe the truth, she's never been a nuisance or anything. She's just a wonderful dog. So last week we started looking at the evidence that did Jesus die on the cross? Because that was the question some people had, was if he got out of the tomb, he must have just walked out on his own power, that somehow he didn't actually die, that he got better over a 3-day, 2-night stay in the tomb, which we know after we examine the evidence of crucifixion, the evidence of Roman flogging, that's not something you just get up from. As a form of execution, he certainly died. Well, if he died then, we trust that he died, then what's the next logical conclusion? Somebody stole the body. And you can see that that's a story which we just read about, which they're saying that, well, somebody's saying that they stole the body. Where it says the next day, the day after preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate. And sir, they said, we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, talking about Jesus, that deceiver said, after 3 days I will rise again. So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the third day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal the body and tell the people that he is raised from the dead. And this deception will be worse than the last, worse than the first. So this idea that Jesus will be stolen has already been planted. They're already thinking about it. What is going to happen? We're going to seal this guy up. We're going to put him in the tomb. Somebody's going to try to steal him. Something is going to happen. You think about all of our political intrigue that we only watch, and now we have our 24-hour news cycle. Somebody's always thinking about the conspiracies. And you look at some of the evidence, you go, okay, that one makes sense, and I'm not sure about that one. But it's human nature that this something is going to happen. Somebody is going to come and steal this body. It's too important. And so they're very, very concerned about it. But now if we look at the tomb, it's empty. So conclusion is that somebody stole the body. In fact, they had already been thinking through that. But is that a likely scenario that somebody would steal the body? Surface level, it makes sense. But whether or not you can is a different story. You think about a bank, I can go rob a bank. Is it easy? No. If it were easy, everybody would do it. I love watching movies, and I can't remember which movie it is where a couple of these guys decided to rob an ATM machine because it's just cash right there. And so they decided to rob an ATM machine, like they took the ATM machine, and they never got into that. Do you remember? Which movie was that? Which one? Barbershop. Yeah, thank you. It's Barbershop, the movie, all day long they couldn't get into this thing, and they tried everything to open this thing, and they couldn't do it. It looks easy, but it's not. So when we think about the tomb itself, it's not an archaeological dig. It's not Indiana Jones running through here. It's not a lot of tripwires and booby traps to get into this. It was as solid as a rock. It was like a bank vault to get into this tomb. The tomb, we know, as we've seen the pictures now, is not a hole in the ground, which we do. It's not a mausoleum. It is actually a room, a cave cut out of rock, and instead of a hole in the ground, you have the entrance to the tomb, which is more like an opening to an above-ground cave. The entrance was low to the ground, and there was a slanted groove that led down to it, and at the top of the groove would be the stone, a flat stone which is cut out of rock, and it would be rolled by strong men, but fairly easily, rolled into place. But because of the incline, next to impossible without several strong people to push it out of the way. And so it's locked into place. And then on top of that, the Bible says that, we know that from archaeology, that it's going to take several strong people to reopen it. And the Gospel of Matthew also tells us that it was guarded. He says, take a guard. And then it also says, go make the tomb secure as you know how. And so they made the tomb secure by putting a seal on the stone and posting the guard. Now, a seal on the stone lays another layer of protection. A seal in the days of Jesus, where the authorities would wrap a rope or a cord across the entrance. Then they would cover each end of the rope with clay or wax so that no one could move the stone without breaking the seal. Just like a seal on a letter. You know it's open when the seal is broken. You couldn't open it without breaking the seal. And it's also possible that the seal then included the official imprint of the Roman Empire, so that anyone who broke the seal would be committing an imperial offense, which is going to be punishable by, guess, by death. And then on top of it, it was guarded. And when we say guarded, we're not exactly sure about how many guards. The pictures we have from Sunday school show 2 guards, and people think, well, if there were just 2 guards, they probably fell asleep. They're the lazy guards. No, these are well-trained guards. They knew that this was important. They said, for over the period of time of these 3 days, we need to put our best guys on here. There's going to be a rotation. There's nobody going to be falling asleep on the job. These were trained soldiers. So you have trained soldiers, you have the stone, and you have the seal. This is not going to be an easy job. And if we've read anything about the disciples, they had many gifts and abilities, but cracking open a safe didn't seem like one of them. Or coming up with the strategy to figure it out, how to get in there and to remove a body. This is going to be a tough job. So the question is, who then actually stole the body? Because it's going to be hard. So the question is then, some people ask, they say, well, maybe the authorities, or the chief priests or the elders, or maybe the Romans, did they steal the body? And we can look at, the Roman officials, holding the power they did, certainly had opportunity. They could do this, and nobody gets in trouble. They could steal the body. But Pilate had ordered the guard. He could have ordered them away. The Jewish leaders seemed to have a lot of influence and a lot of Roman cooperation along the way. They got Pilate to kill Jesus. So there's some conspiracies going on in there that you could probably think of happening, and I totally believe it. Political theory, what's going on there? They were some shady characters. And everybody had opportunity. But what's the motive? What's the motive? Why would the Romans want to take the body? They sentenced Jesus to death, and part of execution, part of crucifixion was to make an example of people. So what kind of example are they setting, saying, we missed it? We didn't do our job. They had zero motive to actually steal the body. It makes no sense. And they didn't care. They didn't care about the religious implications of all this. They didn't care. They just wanted a dead Jew, and they got one. And he's going to stay dead. So there's no motivation. And then for the Jews themselves, they wanted Jesus dead too. It served them no purpose to steal the body. Because you go back and now through New Testament history, where you have the Jewish people, you have Christianity being born, you have persecution happening of Christians, you have people who are upset, people who are killing people. They could have stopped the whole thing by just pulling out the body and saying, no, we got him. Ha ha, April Fools. And it would have stopped everything. So there was no motive for either of them, really anybody, to steal the body. Now, the people who had the motive, you think might have the motive, would have been the disciples, ones they loved. Now, it could have been either the disciples, the 12, people say, or maybe it was others who are a little bit more radical and say, yeah, we got to keep the mission going. The disciples themselves were not in a psychological state to go and steal a body after everything that has just happened. But maybe it was some other guys. But some people suggest that maybe some others had done this. And this rumor, and began a rumor that they just started this, and then they just stole the body, then started a rumor that Jesus actually rose from the dead. Now, again, the tomb is heavily guarded. There's a stone. There's a seal. The women going down to the tomb were wondering, Who's going to help us roll this thing away because we can't do it? There were no people with them. The disciples, though, were in theory, though, were psychologically improbable. They weren't going to do this. They were depressed. They were disillusioned at the time of Jesus' death. It would have taken something extraordinary to transform the Apostle Peter, who we last saw as betraying Jesus or denying Jesus, to turn him into this man who 50 days later on the day of Pentecost preaching to the thousands and 3,000? Ken, tell me, how many had converted on Pentecost Sunday? 3,000. I usually get 3 to 5 to 6. All right, 3,000 people, a lot of people. To convert that many people that day, to turn into that, it's going to take something extraordinary. How's he going to lead this kind of raid on a tomb? And then, in addition, when you consider how much they had to suffer for what they believed, floggings, torture, and for some, even death. Think about that. Almost all of them, 10 out of the 11 remaining disciples, were put to death for their faith. How long would you hold on to a lie? Even John, the one who didn't die for his faith, was tortured. And I said this maybe a couple months ago. He was deep fried and boiled in oil. Still held on to it. Still held on to this fact that Jesus rose from the dead. It seems inconceivable that they would have been prepared to endure all of that for something they knew to be untrue. None of them gave up their testimony that the resurrection was real and that it authenticated Jesus' claim that he is God. They never backed off of that. Some of you may know the author Chuck Colson, who was a man who reformed prison ministry because he had been in prison, and he had been in prison because of the Watergate scandal. And some of you remember that. At least you studied it in school. And he wrote this. He says, "I know the resurrection is a fact, and Watergate proved it to me." How? Because 12 men testified that they had seen Jesus raised from the dead. Then they proclaimed the truth for 40 years, never once denying it. Everyone was beaten, tortured, stoned, and put in prison. They would not have endured that if it weren't true. Watergate embroiled 12 of the most powerful men in the world, and they couldn't keep alive for 3 weeks. You're telling me 12 apostles could keep alive for 40 years? Absolutely impossible. So that's like the evidence of why is the tomb empty? Who stole the body? We'll get into more proofs next week. But at the end of the day, as improbable as it may seem, it feels like the most likely scenario is recorded in Matthew 28, verse 11. That while the women were on their way, some of the guards went into the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. When the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money. People know that soldiers, by this happening, you're going to die because this happened under your watch. If somebody stole the body, they failed at their job, they're going to die. When they held prisoners, if the prisoner escapes, they'd be accountable and that they would die. And they say, well, they couldn't have done that, but here we are, the soldiers, a large sum of money, and we know they had access to a lot of money. They had influence. We see that with even Judas Iscariot for 30 pieces of silver. Betray this guy. This is part of their MO. You see it happening. This is part of their character. He says, then tell the soldiers, says, you are to say the disciples came for the night and stole him away while we were asleep. Then if the report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble. Whether they did that or not, I don't know. But we can see they had influence with the governor. They had influence with other people to make things just kind of go away. So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed. And then this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. And what I love about this story, and as we examine the facts, of Christianity, Christianity as a faith begs to be investigated. Begs to be investigated. When you look at archaeological evidence and look under archaeological science and evidence, there's nothing in the Bible that archaeology contradicts. Science of the time, there's nothing. It begs us to investigate it so that it can be believed. There is no other faith or religious system out there like this. It is, to coin a phrase, an open book. It's an open book, and God says, investigate it. Look at it. Take any of the things that are taught in here and see how it doesn't impact your life. Think about the evidence of the resurrection, the evidence in archaeology of the Old Testament and the New Testament. Investigate these things. And the really neat thing about that, what I really like about that, is that my faith has a solid foundation. That as many times as people can rail against it and speak against it and say all sorts of empty words against it, doesn't shake it, because it's based in fact. It's based in fact. We don't have to get upset about things when people speak poorly or poorly or, so I'm mincing my word, this morning I'm having a hard time. Poorly or ill, just say ill. Ill of what you believe because of something that they feel. Well, how could a God do this? And there's people that all sorts of distortion around it. You don't have to question, because God says, well, talk to me about it. I'm an open book. Let's take that subject. Let's take that thought. Let's take all that, and let's address it. And it's solid and sure. And I never have to get upset. I never have to get upset, because I know it's true. And when you know the truth, and if somebody doesn't know the truth, okay, I know the truth, that Jesus rose from the dead. If they want to persecute you, okay, the disciples went through that. They want to persecute you, okay. They never got upset about it. They rejoiced when they were persecuted. They didn't yell and make, no, they said, no, this is what's going to happen. We're happy we're getting persecuted for it. Because Jesus told us, guess what? You're going to get persecuted for your faith. Because it's nuts. Because it doesn't make sense. But then you have the opportunity to tell people the truth. And it'll change the world. But not just change the world, because this world is going to go away someday. It's about bringing people to heaven, where true change happens. And I love that, the fact it begs to be investigated. So if you're a person who has doubts, it's okay. Investigate. But never just let it go. Investigate, investigate, investigate.